For a long time, I felt that I shouldn't tell anyone about what I had experienced. What I saw was beyond the limits of our mortal existence, utterly shocking. But after 8 years of silence, I finally decided to share my story. The first person I told was my wife. To my surprise, she neither doubted nor dismissed it. On the contrary, she listened intently, asking me for every detail about what had happened to me in a place where no living person is meant to go. This was the beginning of the extraordinary confession of Nikolai Potsvirov, an ambulance doctor who had spent years working in intensive care, until the day came when doctors had to fight for his own life. Nikolai had never been particularly interested in whether patients saw anything after death, but when he himself crossed that boundary, everything changed. It happened in the summer of 1978, when Nikolai, then 50 years old, suddenly suffered cardiac arrest in the middle of his shift. What followed completely upended his understanding of life and death. The most shocking revelation, he later admitted, was that even after his heart had stopped, he was still alive, though in a form he could never have imagined. His last conscious thought was about his teenage son. How will he live without me? Then came oblivion. But it didn't last long. In what felt like mere moments, he regained awareness, only to find himself in a situation beyond all reason. As an atheist, Nikolai had never believed in an afterlife. Yet here he was, experiencing something that defied all logic. He had expected to wake up in a hospital room, perhaps in intensive care. Instead, he found himself hurtling through a dark tunnel at an ever-increasing speed. Terror and an unexpected sense of freedom warred within him. He later described it in his own words, "I was moving so fast that I couldn't see anything around me. I shot through the darkness and emerged into a brilliant light, so bright I couldn't look at it. But then, gradually, the blinding glare faded, and I was finally able to see." Only now did he finally find himself where he had expected to be, in a hospital room. But something was strange. The walls radiated a soft, white light, unlike anything he had ever seen. Then he realized his vision had changed. He no longer saw the world as he once had. Wherever he looked, he could perceive everything happening around him with astonishing clarity. More than that, he could see through solid objects. But the most unsettling part, he couldn't see himself at all. He had no idea what he looked like in this new state of existence. As Nikolai continued to observe, he discovered another shocking ability. He couldn't hear the voices of those around him. Yet he knew their thoughts. It was as if he had gained the power to read minds. Overwhelmed with concern for his family, he thought of his home. And in an instant, he was there. Standing in his own house, he saw his wife and immediately tried to speak to her, desperate to explain what had happened. He stood right in front of her, talking with all his heart. But she didn't see him. At one point, she even walked right through him. That was when he understood. There was no way for him to reach her. And then came the moment he would remember with a shudder for the rest of his life. What he later called his personal purgatory. He described it like this: "When I was outside my body, my entire life flashed before me, from my very first memories. But I didn't just see my past, I relived it from the perspective of how my actions had affected others. Every wrongdoing, every moment of selfishness or cruelty came back to me with unbearable clarity. And it wasn't just a vague sense of guilt. It was a crushing shame that brought me to tears. No matter how much I tried to justify my actions, I couldn't. I realized then that you cannot lie to your own soul." When the weight of his regrets became unbearable, something powerful suddenly pulled him away. A force like a mighty wind lifted him, throwing him back into the dark tunnel. He felt himself rushing backward, the light fading as the tunnel slowed his descent. And then in a final jolt he fell, back into his body. The return was nothing like he had imagined. It was unpleasant, almost repulsive. His body felt cold, sticky, and painfully restrictive, as if he had been forced into a suit that no longer fit. But he was alive. And from that moment on, he knew he could never keep silent about what he had experienced. He made himself a promise. One day, he would tell the world, not just about the existence of life after death, but about how much it depends on the way we live here and now. Reflecting on it all, Nikolai had one thing to say to skeptics: "I can't stand it when people say that no one has ever come back from the other side. But what about me? What about others like me? We have returned. To deny that is sheer ignorance. And to those who doubt, I ask, just how exactly do you expect someone to return from the afterlife? Is it truly impossible to prove anything to those who stubbornly refuse to see the truth? Those who exist like the living dead, clinging to denial? The issue isn't a lack of evidence. It's their unwillingness to accept it. But for those who have ears to hear, I share my extraordinary experience of stepping beyond this world. Another man who returned from the afterlife was the renowned physicist Vladimir Efremov, a man of science who played a direct role in launching Yuri Gagarin into space and contributed to the development of spacecraft. His reputation was impeccable, and speaking openly about such an experience risked his credibility and career. Yet, after his own journey beyond death, he felt compelled to share his message with the world. It happened unexpectedly. While visiting his sister, Efremov suffered a severe coughing fit caused by chronic bronchitis. His breathing became labored, his body weakened, and soon he lost consciousness. His heart stopped. In those final moments, as he struggled for breath, he realized that his life was slipping away. Then, suddenly, everything changed. He felt an incredible lightness, a pleasant weightlessness. But the most astonishing part was that his consciousness remained intact, even though his heart had ceased to beat. Later, he would compare the sensation to the carefree joy of childhood, or the surreal experience of flying in a dream. Like so many before him, he found himself separating from his physical body and being pulled through an immense tunnel toward a brilliant light. Though he no longer had a physical form, he could still perceive everything around him. Yet there was no fear, no panic, only a deep, almost exhilarating curiosity. He later described the experience in his own words. Everything felt fresh and fascinating. My consciousness expanded, encompassing everything at once. Time and distance no longer existed for me. The space around me resembled a vast cylindrical tunnel, illuminated by a steady, shadowless light. Within this strange tunnel, he observed complex, shifting structures that seemed to have their own unique relief. He struggled to distinguish up from down, yet the realization struck him. If I am thinking, then I must still exist. Then, Efremov encountered something even more remarkable. He suddenly knew everything about the world he had just left. It was as if his mind had transcended earthly knowledge, his memory merging with the vast intelligence of the universe itself. He also became aware that the realm beyond life was not confined to the three dimensions of our physical world, but contained far more. He explained it this way. My interaction with this environment was no longer one-sided. Any question that formed in my mind was instantly answered, as if knowledge itself materialized out of nowhere. His experience defied logic, yet felt more real than anything he had known in life. And when he returned, he was no longer the same man. Efremov also described the nature of the afterlife as fundamentally different from our earthly reality. There, processes did not unfold in a linear sequence, but occurred simultaneously, expanding in all directions at once. Moreover, everything in that realm existed not as physical matter, but as vast informational blocks of knowledge and experience. But the most extraordinary revelation came later, when he had calmed down enough to observe his surroundings more closely. What he discovered would forever change his perception of existence. He recounted the experience in his own words. I realized that I was not alone. Something or someone was guiding me. This presence was everywhere, without boundaries, yet it did not impose itself upon me. It moved with an unmistakable intention, not to frighten me, but to help me understand. It revealed things to me, phenomena, truths, the intricate web of cause and effect that governs existence. Though I could not see it, I felt an unshakable spiritual connection. Was it a guardian angel? A guide from beyond? Perhaps even a fragment of the divine itself? I cannot say for certain. But one thing I know, in the afterlife, we are not abandoned. There is always someone waiting to receive us. Yet, not all of Efremov's journey was serene. Just as he felt himself moving deeper into the higher realms, something held him back, an unseen force pulling him away, like roots dragging a plant from the soil. Suddenly, he was yanked backward. Moments later, he awoke in his physical body. His first words left his sister in stunned silence. There is no end. Life continues there too, but it is nothing like here. Though only 7 minutes had passed in the earthly realm, Efremov had undergone an experience that defied time itself. He had glimpsed the secrets of another existence, one that human consciousness is rarely allowed to perceive. And when he had fully recovered, he made a quiet but profound declaration to his family. "I no longer fear death. It is not an end, only a door to another space." Another man who crossed the boundary between life and death was neurologist Georgy Radonaya. His words carried a powerful weight, spoken with an unshakable certainty. "What I encountered beyond the veil of our mortal existence will leave no one indifferent, whether you are a believer or a staunch atheist. The afterlife is not as you've been told. Believe me, I know what I'm saying, for I have not only stepped beyond the horizon of life, I have returned." Radonaya's near-death experience remains one of the longest ever recorded. Unlike most cases, which last mere minutes, his journey stretched on for days. When he finally came back, it wasn't in a hospital bed, it was in the morgue. It all began in 1976, when he was struck by a car. He was rushed to intensive care, his condition critical. Doctors fought to save him, but ultimately they failed. His death was declared. The medical team had done all they could. But for Radonaya himself, death was not the end. It was the beginning. "I saw everything unfolding as if from outside my body," he later recounted. Yet a single terrifying thought echoed in my mind. How can I still be when I no longer exist? And then, the full horror of his situation sank in. But what followed for Georgy was even more shocking. His soul felt as if it had been seized by an invisible force, swept away like a leaf caught in the wind. And then the most terrifying part of his otherworldly journey began. Everything around him was suddenly engulfed in darkness, dense, impenetrable, absolute. At first, he thought he had fallen into a dream, but he quickly realized that he was fully awake. The darkness wasn't just around him, it pressed against his consciousness, thickening like a living presence. Recalling this harrowing experience, he later said, "Even though I was surrounded by pitch-black emptiness and had no sensation of a body, I still knew I was me. There was no physical pain, but the darkness felt overwhelming, as if it were pushing against my very essence. I wasn't prepared for this. I struggled to understand what was happening. Was I trapped? Was this some kind of void? Questions flooded my mind. Why am I in the dark? What should I do? The only thing I knew for certain was that I still existed, somewhere beyond the world I once knew." Then, like a revelation, a thought broke through the oppressive gloom. If there is darkness, then there must also be light. As soon as he focused on this idea, something extraordinary happened. The black void around him began to recede, thinning like mist in the morning sun. Then, in an instant, a brilliant white radiance erupted into existence. It was blinding, so intense that Georgy compared it to the flash of 1,000 cameras going off at once. But as he adjusted, he felt an indescribable warmth emanating from the light, filling him with peace and comfort. He described what followed. "As my eyes adapted to the brightness, I began to look around. And then I saw something incredible. The space around me wasn't empty at all. It was made up of countless tiny particles, like molecules and atoms. At first, their movement seemed random, chaotic. But then I realized that the chaos itself had a perfect symmetrical beauty to it." It was in that moment that Georgy grasped something profound. He was witnessing the very essence of all living things. The fundamental structure of existence had revealed itself to him. And as he marveled at its elegance, all his previous fear and anxiety dissolved completely. He no longer worried about his body, nor about the fate of his soul. The barriers that had once limited his understanding of life and death had crumbled. Then, a new glow appeared. This time, not white, but golden. A luminous disk like a miniature sun emerged before him. Its light began to permeate his very being, and as it did, waves of ecstasy coursed through him. It was a sensation beyond words, a kind of euphoric understanding, as if the universe itself was revealing its deepest truths. In that moment, everything made sense, Georgy recalled. It was all connected, logical, precise, and infinitely right. Life was not meaningless, existence was not random. There was a purpose, a direction, an evolution that stretched beyond anything I had ever imagined. And then, another revelation struck him, one even more staggering. His entire life unfolded before him in its entirety, from the moment of his birth to his tragic death on the operating table. But he wasn't just remembering it, he was reliving it. Every moment, every decision, every action was laid out before him as if projected in a vast, multi-dimensional hologram. He saw himself as both the participant and the observer, experiencing everything at once. And in that breathtaking vision, Georgy understood a truth beyond all doubt. Life is endless. It exists everywhere in countless forms, ever-changing, yet eternal. The boundaries we believe in are illusions. Existence is unified, interconnected, one infinite flow of being. One might think that Georgy's journey beyond death had come to an end. But fate had one more shocking twist in store for him. An event so harrowing that, for years, he could barely recall it without a shudder. While his soul was exploring the mysteries of the afterlife, his body had already been declared dead and transported to the morgue for an autopsy. The pathologist, following standard procedure, made a long incision down the chest to begin the examination. And that was when Georgy opened his eyes. At first, the doctor dismissed it as a mere reflex, calmly closing the lifeless lids once more. But a moment later, Georgy's eyes flickered open again. This time, something about them was different. Alive. Frozen in shock, the pathologist hesitated, then quickly grabbed a lamp and shone it into Georgy's face. What he saw next defied all logic. The pupils reacted to the light. Realizing the impossible had just happened, the doctor sprang into action, rushing the body, no, the man, to intensive care. By all medical reasoning, this resurrection should have been impossible. Too much time had passed since his heart had stopped. The body had already begun the process of post-mortem examination. And yet, against all odds, life had returned. But for Georgy himself, the experience of coming back was anything but peaceful. He later described it as being violently torn from the ethereal realms and hurled downward, dragged through suffocating darkness and excruciating pain, before finally slamming back into the confines of his own body. Upon awakening, he carried with him not just the physical scars of his ordeal, but the knowledge of something far greater. Speaking about his experience, he later said, "The afterlife is a reflection of the soul. For the wicked, it is a descent into the darkest corners of existence. But for those with kindness and light in their hearts, it is a journey into the higher realms, where life does not end, but continues without limits."